Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor. Earlier today, the Supreme Court released one significant decision amongst a handful of lesser importance, and it had to do with election law, and most specifically, the role of state legislatures in determining election laws and protocols for federal elections. This might get us closer to resolving something that's been up in the air and, frankly, the subject of hotly contested debates over the last several years. Joining us right now to dissect the decision is J. Christian Adams, president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation and the founder of the Election Law Center. Mr. Adams, thanks for joining us tonight, as always.
Thanks so much, Larry.
So this has to do with whether the courts have a role in overseeing what the legislatures do. In fact, there's some school of thought that said that the legislatures have supreme power over these, even over the governor. Is that right?
Well, right. And Public Interest Legal Foundation actually filed a brief in the case arguing that the Constitution says what it says. But the Supreme Court disagreed today and said that state judicial review plays a role also. And they cited Marbury versus Madison, which is this ancient cases.
Isn't that like the first Supreme Court decision? I remember that from my U.S. history class in high school.
Right. And so when you read Marbury showing up in an opinion, you know things are going to get serious. But look, this was not a big surprise. I mean, the North Carolina legislature lost. Our brief obviously didn't persuade the court, but it's not a huge surprise. I mean, the court had said in an opinion 100 years ago that the governor can veto a state legislative enactment on elections, and that's okay under the Constitution. It ruled that the state of Arizona can give away its power to a referendum, and that's okay with the Constitution. So today the court just said, the state Supreme Court can review it too. So it's not the biggest surprise. I wish it had gone the other way, but it's not the end of the republic.
But you and others who also wrote briefs in support of the losing side today, if I may use those terms, you were, as you said, saying that the Constitution says what the Constitution says, and the last time I read the Constitution, it said that each state legislature shall determine this. If they had meant through their legislative process with the governor and the Senate, they would have said that, but they didn't.
Well, look, that was the argument we made, and the court rejected, and it said that, you know, when the Constitution was enacted in 1787, that there was state legislative review by courts, and that the governor in some states way, way, way back in 1787 could veto election laws. And so what the court said was, look, this was part of the bundle of state activity. When the founders wrote state legislature, it included vetoes, it included judicial review. That's sort of what the court did today. It's not a completely unreasonable argument. Okay. It was just a very close call that went the other way.
And this, by the way, is called the independent state legislative theory, right? That's the legal theory that this was built on, that your argument was. But there is another decision that we're still waiting on that is still in play with regard to who gets to have the final say here, isn't there?
Well, this is a very complicated procedural history with the state of North Carolina. The best part is the state Supreme Court reversed itself. It said that you can't have partisan gerrymandering, and then a whole brand new court after an election said, oh, yes, you can. So it's all kinds of crazy.
Okay. Now, this also has certain ramifications with regard to looking backwards to the 2020 election and also looking forward to the next presidential election. Because Lord knows, J. Christian Adams, they're going to try to do the same thing that they did last time, which is if a state legislature, even if it's signed by a governor, comes up with the protocols and laws that govern the federal election procedures in any given state, Secretary of States are going to try to step in and make some last-minute changes, or they'll find a friendly judge to say, oh, no, we're not going to count the ballots that way, or we're going to allow mail-in ballots this way. So does this open the door for more shenanigans?
No more than it was already open, Larry. What was happening in this case was the North Carolina legislature was trying to throw a Hail Mary pass on the Constitution. They were trying to lock down put a wall around state judicial review. It was a big ask, okay? And we supported that ask, but it's not going to change anything. And yes, indeed, it's still going to allow the same mischief that occurred in 2020 because state Supreme Courts will be able to review laws. Look, that's how we've lived in this country for 200 years. This is not a radical change. We were trying to get limits on the power of courts to review this, and we failed.
Setting aside the question of whether courts should have this oversight or not, I'm seeing some commentators from the conservative spectrum seeing this decision, and their reaction is, well, we need federal laws. We need Congress to step up, and there should be more federal laws so that it's consistent from state to state. How do you argue that?
Terrible idea, because the founders wanted to delegate power to the states because it was a check on tyranny. What the founders feared correctly was federal tyranny. So the last thing you want to do is give people like the Marxist from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, and all of the disastrous figures in Congress any more power over this. Congress can go the other way. Do not view Washington, D.C. as the solution. That's what Ronald Reagan told us, and it applies here.
But doesn't that mean then that the good people of Oklahoma, no matter how politically active they are and how conscientious they are in making sure that their voting system is protected and solid, we're still beholden to the whims of the legislatures of California and New York?
Yeah, and that issue was decided in 1865. And right now we're bound up together with all the mystic chords of memory. And we just have to learn to find a way to respect the federal design of giving states power. And when we can tinker with it to make it better federally, okay, let's consider it. But that is a dangerous Pandora's box that some people want to open to get Congress involved.
All right, so leave Congress out of it. That's a good rule of thumb. I'm down with that. How goes the efforts? I know that through your organizations, you've been working on a state-by-state basis to try to move things along so that we do have a fairer and more sensible and legal sound election system. How are things looking right now in your estimation?
Yeah, really good in a lot of places. I mean, there's been a lot of energy by a lot of different groups and people the last 2 years to improve the system. There's still some problems out there. As you know, we had a deposition today in our Michigan lawsuit for 25,000 dead voters. And so some states are still dug in ideologically with their head in the sand about the problems. Michigan tops the list. Pennsylvania's right there. Wisconsin, I wish those 3 places were better. But there are places where things have gotten better that were a problem in 2020. Arizona, Georgia, and other places like that have gotten markedly better.
When you say 25,000 dead voters, you mean 25,000 dead potential voters on the voter rolls, or do you mean 25,000 votes that were actually cast by dead people?
Well, it's a mix. Yeah, it's 25,000 registrants. So it's way more than that. These are only the really old people that we found. We didn't even spend the money to look at how many dead 25-year-olds there were. But yeah, it's a mix, and some of them do vote. Judith Presto voted in Pennsylvania, for example. She registered after she was dead. That's a real winner. That's a phenomenon I don't think people quite understand yet. It is happening. People are getting registered to vote after they died, usually by family members.
Wow, I'd be careful if I were you. If you go to Michigan, there could be ghosts right around the corner there, or there's some sort of resurrection effect happening. But I'm glad that you're on top of it. I thought that only happened in Chicago. I guess it's blood across Lake Michigan. Thank you, J. Christian Adams. Great stuff as always. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Larry.
So there you go. He actually wrote one of the briefs with today's Supreme Court decision, and he doesn't seem too upset about it. But, you know, you live on to fight another day. That's what we do. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here. We appreciate you watching the Salem News Channel. You know, one of my favorite things about the White House's reaction to last week's revelations over the Biden family's corruption was this new statement they put out. Oh, we've been saying over and over again for years that the president was not in business with his son, Hunter. No, actually, they've not been saying that for years. What they've been saying for years is that the president didn't even talk to his son about his business, knew nothing about his son's business. They never made the case that he wasn't in business. That's an important distinction. They're moving the goalposts. But here's the really funny thing. He was in business with his son. I know that because I've been reading the great investigative work from Peter Schweizer, who's been all over the Biden family's corruption for many, many years, before it was cool. Peter Schweizer from the Government Accountability Institute. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Great to be with you always, Larry. Thanks for having me.
So yeah, everyone's pointing at, oh, look, they've changed the language. Now they're saying he wasn't in business, but you probably have to shake your head and say, oh, of course he was in business, right? Without a doubt.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, they've shifted the goalposts so many times. In 2018, the first thing was there were no business deals in China. Then it became, well, he had business deals in China, but he made no money. Then it switched to, okay, he made money, but Joe Biden never talked to his son about his business dealings. Now it has evolved, as you said, to saying, well, he did not participate in his son's business dealings. All of those are inaccurate and falsehoods. All you have to do is look and ask the question, what was Hunter Biden's business? They took in tens of millions of dollars from these overseas entities. There's no tangible service or product that they were selling, and yet the money kept coming. And the reason the money kept coming is because the product was Joe Biden.
Yeah.
We know that Joe Biden met with and talked with his business partners. We know that Joe Biden received some of the money through Hunter in terms of Hunter paying for things for his lifestyle. So he was absolutely an active participant.
Peter, what really concerned me about this press conference on Friday, which was extraordinary because finally you saw some other reporters saying, hey, maybe there's something here. It was the fact that it was Admiral John Kirby, who's the spokesperson for the National Security Council, because this is more than just your good old-fashioned government corruption and selling access, which it is. But this really is a national security issue when you look at who's giving the Biden family this money, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a key point that I would make and that I hope the congressional committee makes is it's not just a question of the corruption. It's, as you said, who's giving them the money. If you look at China, you look at the three businessmen that landed the biggest deals for Hunter Biden, totaling some $31 million. Each and every one of them has ties to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. And that's not hyperbole. One guy, Henry Zhao, that wired $5 million to Hunter Biden, wired it from an account in Hong Kong that he shared with the family of the former Minister of State Security, who ran the entire spy apparatus of China. The same sort of things applies to all the businessmen. So, yeah, this is not just about corruption. This has all the hallmarks of a Chinese effort to recruit or influence or develop compromise on the first family of the United States. And that makes it a national security and espionage question, not just a corruption one.
Congressman Jim Jordan, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has said that he's going to try to subpoena the information with regard to what's now being called a burner phone that Hunter Biden purchased for his father. I think you were the one who actually uncovered this with the great investigative work that you do. What can you tell us about this phone? When was it purchased for Joe Biden?
Yeah, it lines up with when Joe Biden was vice president. So it was purchased in 2009. And the bill, according to Hunter Biden's laptops, Hunter Biden's own emails, the bill was being paid for that phone, Joe Biden's phone, by Hunter Biden's business, Rosemont Seneca Partners. And that means that Hunter Biden had access to him via that phone number. So did the other Rosemont Seneca partners, Eric Schweizer and others. And that phone kept in Joe Biden's possession until he left the vice presidency. We only uncovered it, Larry, because Hunter Biden was asking his dad to pay his own phone bill because he was tired of his business having to do so. So this, in my mind, is crucial because if the allegation is true that there are phone recordings of Joe Biden talking to a Burisma executive about a bribe, I would bet this is the phone that phone call took place on.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but when your son's company purchases a phone for you to use, aren't you kind of in business with your son? I mean, that's a company phone.
Yeah, that it sounds about right. That's correct. And the other important thing to remember is this means Joe Biden can't claim executive privilege. He can't claim privacy. Not a government phone, not his personal phone. This is the property of a private company that is being run by his son.
Even if that phone conversation took place while he was in the West Wing or in the old executive office building, it's not a government phone. That's an important point too, and that's why I think the Judiciary Committee is looking after these phone records. Let me ask you this. We've, of course, heard about this infamous meeting with an executive from Burisma when President Biden was vice president. We know that there was a demand for $5 million for Hunter Biden and for Joe Biden. And this FBI informant, a credible informant, has said that the payments were made. Through your research, has there been any payments around that time to Hunter Biden's companies that have lined up with the $5 million price tag?
Not to my research, but that's only because, the Bidens are known, and it could be more, they're known to have used 12 separate banks for financial transactions. We know that Burisma, which is the company that allegedly sent this bribe to the Bidens, helped Hunter Biden set up a bank account in Malta. Right now, the congressional committees, the House Oversight Committee, has subpoenaed records from 4 of those 12 banks. So we don't have the transactions, but I got to tell you, a lot of this rings true. Joe Biden made a very, very curious trip in January of 27, just hours before Donald Trump was sworn in as president of the United States. Where was Joe Biden? Where was the sitting vice president? He was in Ukraine. He took a last-minute plane trip to Ukraine where he met with Ukrainian officials. Just a couple of days before that trip, Burisma announced that the Ukrainian government was no longer investigating Burisma on corruption, and it was going to create a whole host of capital opportunities. So there's a lot of suspicious behavior here, and this conforms with what we know about the Bidens and how they have operated.
Hold on. I just want to make sure that we soak in this for a moment, a little marinade. After 45 years of public service, holding office as a United States Senator and then Vice President for 8 years, just days after he is now retired and no longer responsible for any elected position, he takes a break by going to Ukraine? He immediately went to Ukraine?
Well, Larry, it's actually the few days before he was leaving the vice presidency, which makes it even more
That's even more suspicious.
Exactly.
In his final days as vice president, with any kind of influence over the government, he goes to Ukraine.
Yeah, and he meets with Poroshenko, who was then the leader of Ukraine, and other Ukrainian officials. 4 days before that, Burisma, his son's energy company, which allegedly also paid this bribe to Joe Biden, announced publicly that the Ukrainian government had ceased all investigations on corruption pertaining to that company.
Peter Schweizer, we've seen these scandals come and go, and we've seen the narrative change. We've already pointed out that first it was never knew anything about his business, never talked to him. Oh, sure, he made money, but I never was involved with it, and I didn't make any money. And now it's I wasn't in business with him. I feel like we're only a couple of weeks away before the message is, sure, there was money made from foreign entities, but not, and we took a couple of meetings here and there, but not one policy decision was affected by the money. Is that the bar? First of all, do you think that they can credibly say that? And is that the legal bar? As long as he can say, hey, we would have done this thing with the prosecutor anyway, it doesn't matter that they paid us. Isn't that still against the law?
Yeah, it still is against the law. Imagine you're a county council member and you take a bribe from a developer to vote in favor of something. To say, well, I would have voted in favor of it anyway, still does not excuse the fact that you took a bribe.
Right.
Look, the other thing we have to realize is corruption takes many forms. One is the quid pro quo that we hear about. The other one is akin to a retainer agreement, right? You basically have got politicians or politicians' family on the payroll to sort of just nudge them along a more general favorable posture. That is also illegal. So whether it's quid pro quo, a specific policy change, or a so-called retainer agreement, it is still corruption. It is still illegal.
Peter Schweizer's book, Profiles in Corruption, is a must-read to help get a handle on exactly what we're seeing in the headlines today. And his work at Government Accountability Institute is absolutely critical. Peter Schweizer, thank you for joining us tonight, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Larry.
There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here at Salem News Channel. I'm sure you've been wondering, how exactly is Joe Biden going to wiggle his way out of this one, right? What lie is he going to come up with to rationalize the criminal behavior of his son and his brother and himself and anyone else who's been in the dirty, slimy, tawdry Biden world over the last several years? Well, we got a little hint of it from Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times. He wrote an article this weekend saying, this whole Hunter Biden story, it's not really about presidential corruption. Oh, hey guys, it's not about presidential corruption. That's a relief, isn't it? No, Nick Kristof says it's really about addiction. And there was Anna Navarro on The View, Johnny on the spot, picking up the talking point and the narrative that seems to be repeated now from the left all over the place. Here's Anna. Go, Anna. Go on. Come on.
The Hunter Biden story, the scandal, the this, the that. It's also the story of a father's love. And Joe Biden has never and will never give up on his son Hunter, and will never treat him lesser than. And so he is a father first. Take it or leave it.
I choose leave it. Curtis Houck is the managing editor at Newsbusters. Curtis, this thing, it's not about tax fraud. It's not a gun felony charges. It's not about taking bribes. It's not about selling out our country to a foreign national. It's not about any of those things. And it's certainly not about the tawdry photographs with very young looking prostitutes. No. Curtis, it's about a father's love.
It's not about selling state secrets either, Larry. You know, it's not about any of that either. It's the same sort of thing how Joe Biden seemingly just tries to bring up Beau Biden every single chance he gets. I understand he lost his son, but, you know, when he was with the families, the 13 Americans who died at the Abbey Gate in Kabul, he was trying to be like, I know just how you feel. That's what some of the families have said, that he tried to tell them, I was in your position when my son died of brain cancer. And you're like, no, not quite. And the media really didn't bat an eye at this at all because, you know, we're supposed to feel sorry for Joe Biden as if he's just this person who's been beset by tragedy. It's the same sort of thing with the Kennedys. We're supposed to have, you know, give Kennedys extra grace in their behavior, you know, over the years, over the decades, because so many horrible things have happened to them. Therefore, we, you know, should give them, except RFK Jr. Except RFK Jr., we can't talk about him at all because he has really crazy views. He can't even be talked about at all.
Yeah, he's not a sympathetic figure because he's running against Joe Biden. You're so right.
It's just a personal leash. It's a long leash that just never seems to end. And where they say talking about this takes away from real issues that are pertinent to our democracy.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the old playbook going all the way back to Bill Clinton. To be fair, Richard Nixon used that one, too, during Watergate. But you're so right to point this out. It's like I remember the Menendez brothers, the murdering brothers who killed their parents, and their lawyer argued for mercy in front of the jury because, after all, they're orphans, right? It's like, that's exactly what this is like. So is the media going to pick up on this? I mean, you saw on Friday, Curtis, you watch these guys all the time. It seemed like in the press briefing, some of these reporters were smelling blood in the water.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we did a time count of ABC, CBS, NBC. We just put out this morning from our Jeff Dickens. We found that between Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the major broadcast networks gave 5 minutes and 3 seconds on Hunter Biden and his WhatsApp, you know, all this kind of Hunter Biden coverage. But, you know, as we look then at the Trump indictment coverage, we've zoomed out since the initial indictment on June 8th that came out, leaked out through today. We are at 510 minutes of coverage.
Wow.
For Trump. But we can't even get 10 minutes on Hunter Biden.
Right.
We can't get to any of that because, again, drug addiction.
They're still in single digits. Well, sure, because, you know, I'm sure the editor in the newsroom says, no, we don't want to do a segment on this because people are bored with drug addiction. And that's really all this story is. And a father's love. That's the other part of the story. Meanwhile, I mean, I don't know about father's love, but it sure seems like Joy Reid and her colleagues at MSNBC, they've got it bad for Donald Trump. Take a look at this.
What'll happen here?
And Stuart, I'm going to give you the last word on this because, you know, Chris Christie got booed for telling the truth about Trump. So, and he's at 5%. He's, you know, he's somewhere. He's not nowhere. He's ahead of Nikki Haley and some of the others. But what does it say about the Republican Party that the next guy down is Ron DeSantis, who is running the most openly fascist campaign I think I've ever seen? And I'm saying that having covered Donald Trump running for president. That's the next guy down.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you're inside the DeSantis war room, you got to think of a way to get yourself indicted to get up ahead of Donald Trump. You know, this just goes to my point that this is what the party wants to be. And it's a hard thing for a lot of us who worked in the party to accept that we helped create this month. But we did. And this is very purposeful by the party. It's not something they stumbled into. Their second choice is a guy who is worse than Trump. So it's a threat to what it means really to be an American. And I think we have to realize that and address it accordingly.
Yeah, it is hard to believe this is the same party whose former
First of all, that guy's a Lincoln Project guy, I believe. But secondly, I mean, they talk about how horrible Republicans are and how horrible Trump is and how terrible these things are. But Curtis, they love them, don't they? They can't do without Trump. They can't do without the Republican Party right now. They'd be nowhere.
Well, first, Larry, I have to point out, 21-year-old Curtis is still bitter about Stuart Stevens' role in the Mitt Romney campaign. Say what you want about Mitt Romney, but for those of us of a certain age, that was our candidacy, that our first real presidential campaign, and the disappointment of that night is still deep within my heart, that feeling that we thought we were going to win and we didn't. So I blame Stuart Stevens, total clown. But on 2024, I mean, I have to say, folks, it is right in front of you. They need Donald Trump. The Lincoln Project exists and lives off of Donald Trump. They leech off of Donald Trump. So the idea that anybody else is there, they cannot make the same argument. That kind of claim that DeSantis is more dangerous than Trump, it's going to fall on deaf ears. The entire point of going after Ron DeSantis is to elevate Donald Trump, because the moment Donald Trump goes away, whenever that is, 2028, 2032, whenever, the money spigot is going off.
Right.
And Stuart Stevens and all the rest of them, John Weaver's Lincoln Project, they're not going to be able to afford their fancy kitchens or
Right.
spots on Morning Joe anymore.
Yeah, and listen, Curtis, I think what you're saying is so obviously true, because all you have to do is watch how they interview any of the other candidates. They mentioned Chris Christie. Well, they bring Chris Christie on for a 10-minute segment. 8 of those minutes is talking about Trump.
That's all it is. Yeah. I mean, even, What Are the Uyghurs? Francis Suarez was on with George Stephanopoulos the day he announced, and they spent it all talking about Trump.
Right.
And he just said the American people are frustrated. Even a liberal Republican like him is like, give me a break here. It's really only Asa Hutchinson who's really willing to sit and listen and talk about Donald Trump the entire time, because otherwise nobody's going to know who this guy is anyway.
Well, that's why we still have a very bad case of Asa fever over here.
Yeah, exactly. Asa Mentum. It's like Jim Gilmore over here.
Fire. But Curtis, you referenced the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, who earlier today on our colleague Hugh Hewitt's program here on Salem News Channel, he was asked, what about the Uyghurs? He had no idea what he was talking about. I think he referred to them as the Weebles at one point. But this is a perfect example. It took Hugh Hewitt to ask a policy question about China and very specific issues that Francis Suarez might have to actually confront as a president should he win the election. George Stephanopoulos never asked that. None of the other people on any of the shows that he's gone on asked that, because they don't care. They don't treat this thing like a presidential election. They treat it like the Trump show.
Right, and that was the point in the George Stephanopoulos interview with Francis Suarez. His point was, the more you talk about Trump and only Trump and nothing else, no other candidate, no other issues, there isn't going to be a primary. The voters aren't going to get to hear from anybody else. And Stephanopoulos blurted out, well, that's inevitable.
Yeah.
Inevitable. Putting your thumb on the scales, that is election interference to the highest degree.
Yeah.
Which
is fine. They have every right to do that.
But you have to say to these Trump surrogates really quick, if they want to have cabinet positions, say Trump does get elected, they're going to get asked all these sorts of policy questions in any Senate confirmation hearing. So it's not good for them either to just be talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And also, by the way, the media can go ahead and do what they want, but don't sit there and obsess over Donald Trump and make every segment about Donald Trump and then whine and lament that Donald Trump is doing so well and, oh, what has happened to our country with that? You've made this man. So enjoy it. Enjoy the ride. Curtis Huff, Newsbusters, thank you. There's more to come.
Larry.
This is O'Connor Tonight. Hey, parents, do you ever get frustrated with your kids? It's like, how can I get through to these crazy teenagers? Why are they so obsessed with the climate? They've been brainwashed with the whole global warming thing. How can I get their attention to show them how destructive these anti-emissions policies are? And now, well, it looks like New York City has given us a gift. You're against carbon emissions? Then you can't have any more of that delicious pizza. That's right. The city of New York trying to do away with carbon emissions through wood-fired, coal-fired ovens that make New York pizza really one of the last reasons why anyone would ever want to go back to New York City. So, is this an opportunity to actually bring sanity back to this argument? Let's bring in Mark Morano, who, well, he's the only sane one on this debate. He's the author of The Great Reset and founder of Climate Depot. All right, Mark, is this it? Do we have to explain it? All right, you like all that global warming stuff? You want to be with Greta Thunberg? Then no more pizza.
I mean, this is the New York Environmental Agency, which is coming out now and saying after 100 years of coal-fired, wood-fired tradition for New York pizzerias at some of their finest restaurants and small businesses, by the way, suddenly now they must change because of the emissions are causing all sorts of public health problems, and they want to force these small businesses to add scrubbers, to have regular inspections, increase the cost of doing business. All of this ultimately, Larry, and you know this is what they do in every industry as they get more centralized power. It's going to hurt the smallest businesses. It's going to put them out of business. You're going to get more retail and corporate chains coming in, replacing the small mom and pop, because they won't be able to afford these new health and climate regulations. But this is par for the course in New York City. This is how they operate.
That's right. You're in New York and you're hungry for some pizza. Here you go. Here's your Pizza Hut. What?
Microwaves are much safer out here. They may not taste as good, but they're better for the climate and your health to breathe.
There you go. Exactly. Well, I mean, listen, honestly, I think that this could be one of those tipping point things. They always go too far, Mark. And I saw the pizzeria owners going nutso about this. You know, New York usually votes about 85% Democrat. So these are Democrats, I'm sure, who were saying enough is enough. Could Republicans, if they were smart, actually make an example out of this policy?
Yes, I mean they need to save wood-fired pizza, gas stoves, gas furnaces, gas-powered car, save eating meat. If Republicans just picked up that issue, not just in New York, but nationally,
that's right.
Believe you would have won Congress by a much larger margin if Kevin McCarthy had figured, let's make this a populist, simple issue, and let's talk about gas-powered cars and gas-powered lawnmowers and eating meat and affordable energy. That's what they've got. Now, I did some calculations on this based on a wood-burning stove, sort of like a fireplace that runs all day, 24 hours. I went back and found these stats. You'd have to burn a pizza stove almost 900 years to equal 1 year of John Kerry's private jet emissions of the carbon footprint. So here's the question. If they really, really cared when they're talking about gas stoves and meat, really wanted to do that, wouldn't the first order of business be to ban all private jet travel? Instead, you have Bill Gates bidding for the world's largest private jet private jet companies making record profits. You know, since when? Since the lockdowns began in March of 2020. That's when really private jets went even beyond that, as celebrities and powerful people out to save the climate couldn't be held down by the lockdown.
Yeah, because they didn't want to unmask on commercial flights. All right, listen, Republicans, we're giving you gold here. We're the party of steak, pizzas, and muscle cars.
That's
Democrats are the party of tofu, matcha, and Metro Rail. Okay? Who's going to win that vote? I know who's going to win. All right, let's turn over to Sweden. Sweden, not known for their, right-of-center political policies, but they have turned a corner here on green energy. They're now looking to nuclear power. What's this all about? Have they decided that sustainable energy isn't very sustainable?
Yeah, well, first of all, Sweden, if you recall, for whatever reason, and I didn't see it coming, and I don't think anyone else did, they're the ones that bucked the COVID lockdown.
I do remember. Yes.
Globally. So this is a good sign. Their finance minister came out this week and said Sweden needs a, quote, stable energy system. So now they are rejecting their green energy agenda in Sweden, and they're trying to go full nuclear. Now, they haven't completely abandoned the green energy rhetoric. It's a small country. They're trying to push the nuclear agenda. But this is a huge break, and it's all since Russia invaded Ukraine, and we're seeing the similar things happen now in the UK. We're seeing France double down on their nuclear, but they're now realizing that virtue signaling to a green agenda might sound good 10 years ago when there's no real consequences because the targets are years later, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, a climate hero. Back in 2006, none of the pain that he passed affected Californians till long after he was out of office. Sweden's feeling it now. Europe is feeling it now. No more virtue signaling. And we're finding them rejecting more and more of these net zero mandates. Net zero goals are in trouble. The UN goals are in trouble in Europe.
Very interesting. And I do find it fascinating that this gentleman said we need a stable
Stable.
energy program, which does not mean windmills and solar panels. Thank you very much. Can you explain something to me though, Mark? If you really do worry about carbon emissions and that's your number one concern, I would think nuclear energy would be the perfect solution for you. Why is that not considered green?
It's not considered green because, well, the biggest reason it's not considered, there's the fear, first of all, obviously, of nuclear fallout, nuclear waste. And actually, it was Freakonomics in New York Times, the author said, if you're worried about global warming today, blame Jane Fonda, because it was her movie with Jack Lemmon, The China Syndrome, which demonized nuclear energy and ended it for much of the, certainly for the United States and other countries. But what's interesting about nuclear is because there's no real objection that they can make other than the fear factor, you literally have an energy source that could provide energy, and France is a leading example of this. But the problem is the green agenda really doesn't want plentiful, cheap energy for people, because that leads to overconsumption and other environmental issues. And it leads to too much travel, it leads to too much excess. This is what they're trying to prevent.
Yeah.
And that's why they have 15-minute cities. They want to box you in, lock you in, no cars, no freedom of movement, no private car ownership, limited energy, thermostat control. Then you'll be a good steward of the earth and a model citizen.
Nuclear power will give you too much freedom and too much happiness, and we can't have that. By the way,
Exactly.
I don't want to see any of your comments about Chernobyl. Chernobyl was not a failure of nuclear power. It was a failure of communism and socialism. Real fast, Mark Morano, before we're gone, are you surprised that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is sort of catching a lot of attention, not just from Democrats and the loony left, where he pretty much dwells most of the time. There's even people on the conservative side of the aisle saying, hey, this Kennedy guy is making sense. He doesn't make sense, does he? Isn't he one of the environmental wackos?
Good question. All right, first of all, I interviewed RFK Jr. in 2014 New York City Climate March. He told me that the CEOs of Koch brothers and all these energy companies should be at The Hague with 3 square meals and a cot.
We've run the video on the show here, Mark. I know it very well.
And his campaign actually reached out to me, wanted the whole interview because they said it was causing them all these heartaches. Well, here's the thing. In 2020, RFK came out solidly against the lockdowns, against Anthony Fauci, against the vax mandates, against mask mandates. And I actually, in my book, The Great Reset, put all is forgiven for wanting to jail climate skeptics for taking his stand against the COVID tyranny. But here's the other thing. RFK Jr. is a smart man, and here's why a Trump voter could just as easily vote for RFK Jr. He came out about a month ago. And he was asked, I was on another show, and they asked him, what is your view now on climate? And he said, you won't hear me talk about climate in this campaign. I don't care. I'm not going to try to convince you about climate change. The climate issue has been hijacked by the United Nations and the World Economic Forum for totalitarian control of society.
Interesting. So he has...
That's progress,
He's
Larry.
turned a corner. All right, Mark Morano. I remain skeptical. Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about climate during the campaign. Just once he's in power, then you'll hear about it. Thanks, Mark. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. The Biden administration is the most transparent administration in American history. The Biden White House operates as the most transparent White House we've ever seen in our lifetimes. You know how I know this? Because they tell me all the time. You just ask them. They'll tell you how transparent they are, especially when they're explaining how they now have to reveal something that they had been covering up and not disclosing for weeks or months on end. They're caught in a lie. They're caught doing something wrong, and then they have to expose it. That's when they're most transparent. You know, you'd think for a really transparent White House, they'd have their act together when it comes to putting up the videos of their White House press briefings, because they want the whole world to see, right? They have nothing to hide. They're completely transparent. That's why we were a little concerned when we saw yesterday's press briefing on YouTube. They keep an archive there for everybody to see because transparency. Here, maybe you'll notice the little odd thing that we noticed.
Not just to the PRC, but to other countries all around the world. Now, what they do about this is going to be for them to speak to. All I can do is tell you what President Biden's focused on, and that's making sure, A, we're staying.
She's clearly acting secretary, and we are doing everything that we can during the budget negotiation to make those calls, to have
Wow, that's some jump cuts right there. That is now no crossfade needed. They're not going to win any Academy Awards for editing. We didn't do that. That's how they presented their press briefing. Our colleague over at Town Hall Media, part of the big Salem Media family here, Kevin McMahon, he noticed that edit, and he's like, well, that's weird. let's see what they cut out. You know, there's other feeds out there that you can draw off of. And, well, he found what they cut out here. It's an exchange where Karine Jean-Pierre is bragging about how the president is against any kind of discrimination against journalists out there. You're a reporter. You deserve to be treated with respect. No discrimination allowed against reporters. Here, we'll pick it up from there.
We certainly condemn any efforts of intimidation or harassment of a journalist or any journalist that is just trying to do their job. And so I just want to be very clear about that.
Because you've been discriminating against me for the past 9 months.
Stop. How is she discriminating against you?
No, she called on you. She just gave you a few questions.
If
I
you
just
ask
need a question in
just
9
ask
months.
a question.
Please.
Go ahead,
Allow me
Amra.
to
Pick
do
us
my
up.
job and ask my question. When you say that the journalists are being discriminated against, I've been in this
If this
briefing-
continues, we're going to end the press briefing.
I've been in this
If this
briefing room, I'm
continues,
trying to ask you
you're being
one question.
incredibly rude.
Stop.
You're incredibly rude. You're being incredibly
No, but
rude. You're talking over your colleague.
You're not applying
You're
it in this
talking. You're
briefing.
talking over your colleague.
I'm not talking about the colleagues.
That I'd like to ask.
That was an exchange with a Cameroonian journalist, Simon Ateba. Now, he represents a publication called Today News Africa, and Simon Ateba never gets called on by Karine Jean-Pierre. You know, the fully transparent White House press secretary who is very concerned if any journalist is intimidated or discriminated against or in some way blocked from doing their job. She's very, very concerned about that. Except if that journalist is Simon Ateba sitting right there in front of her. He made a pretty good point. Wait, you don't want discrimination. You don't want to keep journalists from doing their job. You keep me from doing my job every day. Let me ask a question. That's what I'm here for. The good people back in Cameroon, they sent me here to ask you questions. You just ignore me. What's your problem? That's kind of discriminatory, isn't it? My favorite part of the entire video that you just saw is that Karine Jean-Pierre didn't have to do much of the heavy lifting because Simon Ateba got smacked down by his own colleagues. Journalists who I'm sure will then be going to some awards ceremony to get some kind of acknowledgement for their transparency and their courage in the face of discrimination. Simon Ateba will not be invited. Can we go back and just watch that edit one more time so you can see how concerned they were that you and the rest of the public should not see this exchange? Watch.
Not just to the PRC, but to other countries all around the world. Now, what they do about this is going to be for them to speak to. All I can do is tell you what President Biden's focused on, and that's making sure, A, we're staying.
She's clearly acting secretary, and we are doing everything that we.
Man, they're not even good at covering their butts. That's embarrassing. Someone should get fired, but they won't because they don't care. They're arrogant. They know that they'll get away with it. I'm so proud of the Biden White House for pushing back on discrimination. I mean, except when it's in their own ranks. Can I just say, these are dark, dangerous times to be in the journalism business. Light a candle and say a prayer as we try to protect democracy in these, her darkest hours. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place. Keep the faith, Simon Ateba. See you on the radio.